Hey guys, Matt here. Today we are going to get into 1 Timothy 5. And 1 Timothy 5 is kind of where we start to see the rubber hits the road with the church, you know. How do you deal with people? Paul's writing this letter to Timothy, and there's kind of three sections. The first two verses, Paul's telling Timothy how to deal with people, how to deal with older men, older women, maybe younger men, younger women, or similar age. It's important to note here that Timothy's probably in his early 30s at this time, right? And he's going to have to deal with people that are at least twice his age. And Paul tells him a certain way to deal with them. And then in the second section, verses 3 through 16, Paul tells Timothy how to deal with widows. And this is interesting because we're going to see a couple things that might surprise you. Not everybody who's struggling is supposed to get money from the church. Some of them are, hey, the families are supposed to be taking care of them. And in fact, we also see in that section, the second section, why elders and deacons are chosen, why it's so important that they be chosen biblically, why they meet certain criteria, why they have certain characteristics, because the deacons are the ones, or should be the ones, who are responsible in the serving of the widows. Right? We saw that in Acts 6, right? That was kind of the first time we saw the office of deacon maybe being born. So it's a big deal. They have to make tough decisions, right? And then the last section is 17 through 25. We see it concerning elders, okay? Before we get into this, I'm just going to read the first two verses, but I think it's important that we remember how the letter started. The letter started in a unique way. Paul says to Timothy, grace, mercy, and peace to you. He slides in the word mercy. Why? Well, Timothy's young, remember? Don't let him despise your age. We saw that last time, Timothy. We're going to see today, take a little wine for your stomach. Timothy was young. He was sickly. He was probably insecure. He wasn't ready for the task, so he thought. Remain in Ephesus, Paul says. Timothy no doubt wanted to bail. Right? He didn't want to deal with all this stuff. Who could blame him? Right? Timothy was a young guy. So Paul says, grace, mercy, and peace to you. Because young men, and I can attest to this, need extra mercy. A young preacher is going to do something maybe stupid sometimes. He might say something that's kind of foolish sometimes. He's going to need a little extra mercy. He's going to need peace. That passes all understanding to deal with false teachers. That's a big thing. He's going to need mercy. Today we're going to see how to deal with older people. It's a big deal, right? And it's important to remind us, to set the table for this, of what Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 3, 14 and 15. He says, Timothy, I'm writing you this letter so that one ought to know how one ought to behave in the house of God. The household of God. Remember that. It's God's house. And then he goes on to say he's an active and alive God. And we talked about that. And does God seem active and alive in your church? If not, it might be because maybe it's because there's false teaching. Maybe it's because the office of deacon and elder are not chosen biblically. Maybe it's because there's not even an office of deacon or elder, right? Could be for a lot of those reasons. What Paul is saying here in 1 Timothy 3 is he's saying this is God's house. We can't just do church any old way we want, okay? Now that that's set up, now that I'm praying, Paul's literally praying grace, mercy, and peace to Timothy. That's a real deal. That isn't just a little ink writing on a piece of paper. That's a real prayer from an apostle. And so now we see why he's going to need it. Verses 1 and 2, 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Treat younger men like brothers. Older women like mothers, younger women like sisters, in all purity. When you really think about this is kind of convicting because Paul is telling Timothy to treat them like you would your own family members. Look at women like you would look at your own sisters. And that might be more important to us younger guys than it would be to an older guy. We shouldn't be looking at women in church in any other way, right? And he tells Timothy, do not rebuke an older man. Don't rebuke him. There's a difference between rebuking and exhorting or encouraging, as the ESV would say. right? Rebuking would be coming after them publicly and reprimanding them, right? Correcting them in hopes that they would change the way they're talking, the way they're acting, the way they're teaching, whatever it is that needs rebuking. Paul says don't do that, but you still have to address them, right? The church isn't like the pipe fitters union, where like if you're there 40 years, you're at a certain stage. Well, not necessarily, because we looked at training yourself up for godliness, and somebody could be in the church for 20 years and really have a lazy devotional life, and maybe they need some encouraging, even if they're 70 and the pastor's 35, right? Godliness doesn't happen just because you've been in the church for so long. You got to be active. You got to be training yourself up. So Paul says, Timothy, exhort them, comfort them, encourage them, come alongside them. Instead of rebuking them, you kind of put your arm alongside of them. That's kind of the difference. And it's the same way with older women. View them like you would your mother or your father. This is using the presupposition that we treat our mothers and fathers and our brothers and sisters well, right? So Paul says, you know what? Just deal with them as you would a mother and father. Love them. Deal with the younger brothers and sisters like you would your own brother and sister. I could see rebuking a brother, but we have to do it in love, like it says in Matthew 18:15, in private, in hopes that they would come around. Galatians 6:1, using gentleness and respect, right? So in fact, we should expect that. If we're out of line in certain areas, a brother and sister should come to us. And if they're out of line, we should come to them. That's what the church does. That's what the church does to stay healthy. But Paul here is telling Timothy how to act in different roles, and don't be too hard on the older folks. Encourage them, don't rebuke them. All right, we'll pick back up from verse 13 tomorrow. Peace.